I never thought a single moment could shatter everything. One moment, everything was fine, our life was ordinary, but it was mine. The gentle hum of the TV, the soft glow of the living room lamp, the smell of my spouse's favorite dinner wafting through the air. It was all so peaceful. For years, I believed this was our forever, the kind of life that would always remain the same. But one night, just one, changed it all. The evening began like any other. The world outside was quiet. I was curled up on the couch, my head resting on my spouse's shoulder as we watched our favorite show. The rhythm of our breathing matched perfectly, his steady, mine a little more erratic from excitement over the plot twist that had just occurred. We laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes naturally from shared history, from understanding someone better than you know yourself. The love in that moment was palpable, undeniable. But then, without any warning, he reached for the remote control, turned off the TV, and sat back, arms folded. There was an eerie silence that fell between us, one that felt too heavy, too thick for comfort. I glanced at him, wondering if I missed something, if I had somehow made him upset. I waited for him to speak, but he just stared ahead, his gaze distant. "Get out," he said, his voice so calm, so detached. My heart dropped. What was he talking about? Why was he saying this? I opened my mouth to protest, but the words got stuck somewhere deep in my throat. The confusion was suffocating. I tried to speak again, but the fear of breaking whatever fragile peace remained between us silenced me. His expression remained emotionless, the words hanging in the air like a cruel punchline. "I said get out," he repeated, this time with more conviction, the coldness in his tone making it clear that he meant it. The lump in my throat grew larger. I could feel my face flush with a mixture of confusion and panic. "What did I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't respond, just continued to look straight ahead as if I wasn't even there. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. His lack of explanation, the way he just dismissed me, was like a slap in the face. I wasn't sure if it was pride or fear that made me stay silent, but I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Instead, I gathered my things and walked out of the living room, numb, as if my body were on autopilot. I walked to the bedroom, trying to understand what had just happened, but it made no sense. I spent the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment, every interaction, trying to find a clue, a sign that this was coming. But nothing came to mind. The next morning, I woke up to an unsettling stillness in the house. He wasn't in bed. He wasn't anywhere, actually. I hadn't heard him get up, hadn't heard the usual sounds of him getting ready for work. A strange feeling settled over me. He was avoiding me. I could feel it in every corner of the house, in every silent space between us. I tried to gather myself. I went about my morning routine as if nothing had happened, but the events of last night kept replaying in my mind. My mind was racing. What did I do wrong? Was it something I said? Was it something I didn't say? How did everything suddenly change? I stepped into the kitchen, where I found him sitting at the table, drinking his coffee. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. He didn't even say good morning like he usually did. It was like we were strangers living in the same house. The silence between us felt suffocating. I tried to make small talk, something, anything to break the tension. "How did you sleep?" I asked, my voice coming out too small, too hesitant. He didn't answer. Instead, he continued to drink his coffee, staring straight ahead. I tried again, "Is everything okay?" His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a brief moment, but there was no warmth, no familiarity in his gaze, just cold indifference. "Yeah," he muttered, "everything's fine." But his voice was flat, robotic, like he was reading lines from a script he didn't care about. I didn't know what to do. How do you fix something when the other person won't even speak to you? My mind was flooded with 1,000 different thoughts, none of them making sense. I opened my mouth, ready to ask again, but I couldn't. Something inside me told me that if I pushed too much, he'd shut down completely. The day passed in a blur. I was on autopilot, trying to keep my mind occupied with small tasks, folding laundry, washing dishes, anything to keep from sitting in the silence that was growing louder by the minute. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt like a tomb. The worst part was that I couldn't understand why. Everything had been fine, or at least I thought it was. We were happy, or so I believed. We had our issues, of course, what couple does, but we always worked through them, or so I thought. Maybe I was blind. Maybe I had missed the signs all along. Was I too caught up in my own world, in my own routines, to see that something was breaking? I couldn't help but think of the countless times we'd argued in the past. The small things, the little disagreements that never seemed to matter in the grand scheme of things. But now, I wondered, did those small things add up? Did they finally push him to this point? I wanted to ask him so many things. But each time I opened my mouth, I was paralyzed by the fear of hearing something I didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear the truth if it meant it would destroy everything I thought we had. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind refused to quiet down. I tossed and turned, unable to find peace. What was happening to us? What was happening to me? I needed answers. I needed to understand. The house was silent. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of cars passing by outside, all felt too loud in the oppressive quiet. And then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of timing, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. I sat up, straining to listen. It wasn't just any car, it was his car. My heart sank. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. The front door opened and then closed softly. I could hear footsteps in the hallway. He was home early. But it wasn't just him. I heard another set of footsteps, slower, deliberate. A man's voice, low and unfamiliar. I froze. The man's voice was muffled, but I could make out some words. Something about meeting, about things being final. I felt my stomach drop. My heart raced. I wanted to go downstairs, confront them, demand answers. But I stayed in bed, paralyzed by fear and confusion. What was going on? Why was this man here? The door to the guest room creaked open. The man was speaking again, his words more urgent now, and I could hear my spouse's voice faintly, softer this time. I stayed still, my body trembling. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to sit here and wait any longer. I needed to know. The quiet tension that had been building between us for so long was about to explode, and I was about to learn the truth in a way I never expected. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to an unsettling stillness. The house felt different, colder, emptier, like the warmth had been sucked out of it overnight. I hadn't seen him when I woke up, which was odd. Normally, he would be at the kitchen table by now, sipping his coffee, reading the paper, or scrolling through his phone. But today, there was no sign of him. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach, the sick feeling that wouldn't go away, but it clung to me like a shadow. I dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion from lack of sleep. I hadn't been able to rest, not after hearing those footsteps in the hallway, the man's voice in the other room. The conversation had been muffled, but the words final and meeting kept echoing in my mind. Who was this man? Why had he come? And why had my spouse been so distant? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I pulled myself together and went downstairs, trying to act normal, trying to fool myself into believing that everything was fine. The morning routine was supposed to be familiar, comforting. But today, it felt like a hollow echo. I walked into the kitchen, and there he was, sitting at the table, his coffee cup untouched, his gaze fixed somewhere far off. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. It was as if I didn't exist. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed something, anything to break the silence that was hanging between us like a thick fog. He didn't answer, he didn't even look up. The silence in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My heart raced, a mix of fear and confusion flooding my senses. What had happened to us? I tried again. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice small, unsure. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a moment. There was nothing in them, no warmth, no recognition, nothing that resembled the man I had known for so long. Just a blank, distant stare. "Yeah," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Everything's fine." The words hit me like a slap. I could tell he wasn't even trying to convince me anymore. He didn't care if I believed him or not. He had already checked out. The realization settled into my bones like ice. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I opened my mouth to speak again, to demand answers, to ask what was really going on, but I couldn't find the words. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter with each passing second, but I forced myself to remain calm, to hold it together. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Finally, I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee, the routine movements automatic, almost mechanical. But as I sipped the hot liquid, I couldn't help but feel like I was playing a part in some sick, twisted charade. We both knew the truth, and yet we were acting like everything was normal. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what had happened. I had to understand why he was acting this way, why the love I had felt for him seemed to have disappeared overnight. But when I turned to ask him again, the words caught in my throat. "Are you seeing someone?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He didn't react. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me, but then he looked up, his eyes cold and distant. He said nothing, and the silence that followed felt like a death sentence. I didn't need him to say anything. I already knew the answer. The doorbell rang, and I jumped, startled. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, and for a moment, I wondered if it was some cruel twist of fate, if the universe was mocking me. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a harsh scrape against the floor. Without saying a word, he walked toward the door and opened it. I couldn't see who it was from where I stood, but I knew it was him. The man, the one I had heard last night. I stayed frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest as the door swung open. The man's voice was low and unfamiliar, but it was unmistakable. He was here, and whatever was happening, whatever my spouse was hiding from me, it was about to come to light. I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't bring myself to confront him yet, to face the truth that I had been avoiding for so long. Instead, I listened. I listened to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the murmur of voices, the door to the guest room closing with a soft click. It was like I was outside my own body, watching everything unfold as if it were someone else's life. I felt like an intruder in my own home, like everything had been stolen from me without warning. I finally gathered the courage to step forward, to walk to the hallway, to hear their conversation. But just as I reached the corner, I froze. I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. "Is she gone?" the man asked. "Yeah," my spouse replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "She'll be gone soon. I told her to leave." My heart sank. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. He had asked me to leave. He had turned his back on me. I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him now, a nuisance he couldn't wait to get rid of. "I didn't think she'd go so quietly," the man said with a laugh. "I thought she'd put up more of a fight." "She's not worth fighting for," my spouse said, his words cold, almost venomous. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. It felt like my chest had been crushed, the air knocked out of me. I wanted to scream, to confront them both, but the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was listen, my heart breaking with every word. "I've been with her for years," my spouse continued, his voice distant, almost as if he was talking about someone else. "And it's been nothing but a waste of time. I'm done." The tears that I had been holding back for so long finally began to spill over. My whole world was crumbling around me, and I couldn't stop it. The man was silent for a moment, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You're sure she doesn't know?" he asked. "No," my spouse replied. "She doesn't know anything. She's too stupid to see what's been going on right in front of her." The words hit me like a slap, and I stumbled back, my hand clutching the wall for support. I had been blind. I had been so blind to everything happening around me. All this time, I had thought our marriage was real, that it was solid, that we were in this together. But now I saw the truth. My spouse had been living a lie, and I had been too naive to see it. I wanted to confront him then and there. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him how he could do this to me, to betray me so completely. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Instead, I turned and walked away, back to the bedroom, back to the silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind racing, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking as I wiped away the tears, but nothing could stop the pain that was flooding through me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from here. My whole life had been a lie, and now I was left standing in the wreckage, trying to pick up the pieces. All I knew was that everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. And somehow, I had to figure out how to survive this. But the hardest part was yet to come, because the truth wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what I had lost, my trust, my belief in the person I thought he was, and my sense of who I was in this relationship. And I didn't know how to get it back. I spent the rest of the morning trapped in a haze of disbelief. The weight of the truth pressed heavily against my chest, suffocating me with every passing second. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this, or if there was even anything to fix. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, swirling between anger, betrayal, and a quiet, almost shameful sadness. How could I not have seen it? How could I have been so blind to the signs that had been right in front of me all this time? Every little inconsistency, every late night, every time he pulled away emotionally, how had I missed it? I wanted to confront him. I wanted to throw his lies back at him, demand to know how he could have deceived me like this. But the anger, as fierce as it burned inside me, was quickly replaced by a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of questioning everything. I didn't even know if I had the strength left to stand up for myself anymore. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I walked through it in a daze, moving as if I were disconnected from my own body. I couldn't bear to sit down, couldn't bear to stay still. My thoughts felt like they were chasing me, constantly running ahead of me, pushing me forward, dragging me back, all at once. It wasn't until I heard the doorbell ring that I finally snapped out of my stupor. It startled me so much that I almost dropped the glass I had been holding. I set it down carefully, my hands trembling, and walked hesitantly toward the front door. I knew it couldn't be anyone I was expecting. There was no one else I was supposed to meet today. When I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing there on the threshold was the last person I ever thought I would see. The man, the one who had shown up at the house the night before. His presence hit me like a tidal wave, washing away what little control I had left. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to make sense of why he was here now. He seemed to sense my shock. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there for a moment, his hands shoved into his coat pockets. The look on his face was one of calm, too calm, like he had been expecting this moment, like he knew exactly how things were going to unfold. I started, but my voice trailed off, unsure of what I wanted to say, unsure of what I was even feeling. What are you doing here? The man glanced past me into the house, his eyes scanning the interior, almost as if he were looking for something or someone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice steady, almost too steady. It was like he was in control of everything, including this moment, and I had no choice but to listen. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to let him in. I didn't want to face this, not like this. But something about the way he looked at me, something about the way he carried himself, made me feel as if I didn't have a choice. I stepped aside and let him in, closing the door quietly behind him. He walked past me with no hesitation, heading straight into the living room as if he had been here 100 times before. The familiarity of his movements unsettled me. "Sit down," he said, without asking if I was ready. He gestured toward the couch, and despite every instinct in my body telling me to stand my ground, I obeyed. I sat down, trying to keep my distance, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. "I know you're confused," he said, his tone cool, almost detached. "I know this is all a lot to process, but you need to hear this. You need to understand why things are the way they are." My heart pounded in my chest, and I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight with emotion, the weight of everything that had happened, everything I had learned, threatening to crush me. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, his voice softening just a little. "I'm just here to explain things. You deserve to know the truth." The truth, that word, spoken by someone who had played a role in tearing apart everything I had thought I knew, made me want to scream. But I stayed silent, my fists clenched tightly in my lap. I didn't want to hear him. I didn't want to know anything else. But somehow, I knew I had to. I couldn't escape this. I couldn't escape him. "Your husband," he said slowly, as if testing each word, "has been seeing someone else for a long time now. He's not the person you think he is. He never was." The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. The air in the room seemed to thin, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. He continued speaking, but I couldn't hear him over the rush of blood in my ears, over the sound of my own heart breaking. "He didn't just fall out of love with you," the man said, his voice tinged with a kind of bitterness I hadn't expected. "He was never in love with you, not the way you thought. He was always looking for something else, someone else." I shook my head, trying to block out his words, but they kept coming, relentless, cutting through me like a blade. "I know this is hard to hear," he said, his voice soft now, almost too soft. But it's the truth, and you need to hear it from someone who's not him. The words felt like they were tearing me apart. I had always known, on some level, that something was off. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the distance between us. But hearing it out loud, hearing it from this stranger, from someone who seemed to know so much about my life, made everything feel even worse. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. My hands were trembling in my lap, my body shaking with emotion I couldn't contain. "I'm not here for anything," he said, his gaze steady. "I'm just here to make sure you understand what's really going on. I've been involved with him for a while, and I think you deserve to know what kind of man he really is. What kind of life he's been leading behind your back." I felt sick, like I was drowning in everything he was telling me. My stomach turned, my mind racing. I wanted to run, to escape, to forget this moment, forget this day, but I couldn't. I couldn't escape the truth. Not anymore. I stood up abruptly, packing the room, my head spinning. "What now?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What do I do with all of this?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the window, looking outside as if he were waiting for something. For a sign, maybe. Or for the right moment to say whatever he was going to say next. "Now," he said quietly, "you make a choice. You can stay and live in this lie, or you can leave and find a life that's yours, the one you deserve." I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once. Rage, sadness, confusion. But there was something else too, something deeper. A spark of hope, of clarity, breaking through the fog of pain. "Why should I trust you?" I asked, finally able to meet his eyes. "You're part of the lie too. How do I know you're not just as bad as he is?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at me, his face unreadable. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to trust yourself, to see what's right in front of you, and to know that you deserve better than this." His words were simple, but they cut through me. I stood there, staring at him, at the man who had helped bring this chaos into my life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of something. A flicker of clarity. Maybe it was time to stop living in the shadows of someone else's lies. Maybe it was time to find my own truth. But the path forward wasn't going to be easy. I didn't know what would come next, or how I would move on from this. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. And that scared me more than anything else, because making that choice would mean saying goodbye to everything I thought I knew. And I didn't know if I was ready for that yet, but I couldn't run away forever, not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. The truth had hit me like a wrecking ball, and no matter how much I tried to close my eyes and block it out, the reality wouldn't stop swirling in my mind. The words that the man had spoken echoed relentlessly. I couldn't escape them. He was never in love with you. He was always looking for something else, someone else. The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened, my breath becoming shallow. I spent the night tossing and turning, trying to find some peace, but there was none. I couldn't help but replay every moment, every word, every time I'd been blind to the signs. His cold indifference when he'd asked me to leave, how had I missed it? How had I failed to see the cracks that had been forming in our relationship all along? When the morning came, it felt like a new kind of torture. I couldn't remember the last time I had woken up feeling this lost. I had become a stranger to myself, unsure of how to even face the day. But I knew one thing: I needed answers. I couldn't keep going on like this, not without knowing everything. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch. His eyes were glued to his phone, as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't just crumbled around us. It made my blood boil. How could he act so nonchalant, so unaffected, when everything I knew was unraveling? I stood there for a moment, staring at him, before I finally opened my mouth. "Who is she?" My voice was trembling, but there was no mistaking the raw anger in it. He didn't look up, he didn't even flinch. He simply replied, "It doesn't matter. She's not part of this anymore." The coldness in his voice sent a shiver through me. "She's not part of this. What do you mean by that?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I don't owe you explanations anymore," he muttered, still staring at his phone. "I'm done." The words hit me like a slap. I had never felt more invisible, more insignificant in my entire life. But this wasn't the time for silence. I couldn't let him get away with this. I had to confront him, had to make him face the consequences of his actions. "You don't owe me explanations." I said, my voice rising now, filled with hurt. You think I don't deserve to know the truth? After everything we've been through, you think I don't have the right to understand why you're doing this to me? He looked up finally, his eyes cold, detached, as if I wasn't even the person he had once loved. It was as if I were speaking to a stranger. The look on his face made me feel like I was begging for something that didn't matter to him anymore. I don't need to explain anything to you. It's over. You should have figured it out by now, he said, his words sharp and dismissive. It's over, the words echoed in my mind. How could he say that so easily? How could he end everything we had built in such a cold, heartless manner? I deserve more than this, I said through gritted teeth. I deserve to know why you did this, why you chose someone else over me. I deserve the truth. A moment of silence passed between us. He leaned back against the couch, looking up at the ceiling as though he couldn't be bothered to even look at me anymore. His indifference was suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. She doesn't matter anymore. I've made my choice, and I don't want you here anymore. The finality in his voice made my chest tighten. He had already moved on. He had already decided that I wasn't worth his time. It was a slap to the face, a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. I felt the weight of those words crashing into me, drowning me in a sense of helplessness. I had no idea what to say. I had no words that could capture the depth of my pain, my betrayal. I stood there for a long moment, trying to hold on to my composure, but the tears began to spill over. I wiped them away quickly, as though I could erase the hurt if I just kept moving, kept going. Why? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why her? What was I lacking? He didn't answer right away, and for a moment I thought I might hear the truth. But then he spoke again, his words cold and calculated. I wasn't happy, and I didn't want to keep pretending. I wasn't in love with you anymore. The words cut through me like a knife. The man I had loved, the person I had shared my life with, had been lying to me for so long. He had never truly been in love with me. I had been a fool to believe it. So, you just wanted to throw everything away? I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. You didn't even try to fix it. You didn't care enough to make it work. He looked at me finally, but his eyes held no warmth. It wasn't worth saving, he said flatly. Not anymore. The weight of his words hit me harder than I ever could have imagined. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. Everything I had believed in, everything I had worked for, was gone in an instant. And the man I had trusted more than anyone was the one who had torn it all down. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand there, letting him tear me apart with every word. I needed to get away, to find some space to breathe, to clear my head. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my feet carrying me towards the door before my mind could catch up. As I grabbed my jacket from the hall closet, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I didn't have it in me to face him anymore. I didn't have it in me to beg for an explanation that would never come. The door slammed behind me, and I stepped out into the cold air, the weight of everything that had just happened crashing down on me. My mind was spinning. The pain was suffocating, but more than anything, I felt the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had given everything to this relationship. I had put my heart and soul into it, and this was how it ended. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet take me wherever they would, not really caring about the direction I was heading. I didn't want to go back to that house, to that man who had become a stranger to me. I didn't want to face the reality of what I had lost. I found myself standing in front of a small park, the cold wind stinging my face as I stared at the empty swings. The place we used to walk to together, the place where we had shared our first kiss. I had thought those memories would always be with me. I had thought they would be safe, locked away in a part of my heart I could visit whenever I needed. But now they felt like a lie. They felt like a dream I had imagined, something that had never been real. How could I have been so foolish? How could I have loved someone who could look me in the eye and lie to me like that? The tears came again, this time uncontrollable. I sank down onto the bench, my body shaking with the weight of everything. I couldn't understand how someone I had trusted so completely could do this to me. I couldn't understand how everything I had believed in, everything I had built, had been destroyed in the blink of an eye. But the hardest part, the part that cut the deepest, was that he didn't care. He had already moved on, already made his choice. And I was left behind with nothing but the wreckage of a life I had thought I understood. As I sat there, staring out into the empty park, I realized something. I couldn't keep holding onto this pain. I couldn't keep drowning in the betrayal, in the lies. I had to let go. But letting go meant facing a future I wasn't prepared for. And that terrified me. The following days passed in a blur of silence and numbness. Every step felt like a struggle, as though my body was moving through water, heavy and slow. I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly alive. The house, once a place of shared laughter and warmth, now felt like a tomb. There were moments when I couldn't even recognize myself. Who was I now? What had I become? I had tried to tell myself that I could just get over this, that with enough time, I would heal. But the truth was, the pain didn't get easier. It just became a part of me, like a constant ache lodged deep inside my chest. I woke up each day feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me, wondering if I could ever breathe freely again. I spent the first few days trying to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house, though it felt pointless. I ate when I could, though food had lost its taste. I even went for walks, just to be out of the house, away from the place that had become a constant reminder of everything I had lost. But it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for me to face it. The hardest part of all was knowing that my spouse was still in the house, still going about his day like nothing had happened. It felt like a cruel joke. He was so unaffected by everything, so indifferent. It was as if I was the one who had failed, the one who had done something wrong, when all I had ever done was love him. On the fourth day after the confrontation, I found myself standing in front of the bedroom door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't continue living in this place, this house that no longer felt like home. The thought of facing him every day, of pretending everything was fine, was suffocating. I had to leave. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and turned the knob. Inside, everything was the same as it had always been. His side of the bed, still made neatly, his things scattered around the room like they always had been. It all looked so normal, but I knew now that normal was a lie. This wasn't my life anymore. I walked over to the closet and started packing my things, trying to keep my movements steady. It wasn't easy. Every item I touched, every piece of clothing I folded, felt like I was tearing apart a life I had worked so hard to build. My mind raced with questions. What if I was making a mistake? What if this was just a phase? What if I could fix things? But deep down, I knew that I couldn't fix this. He had already made his choice. He had already moved on, and I was the one who had been left behind, shattered in the wake of his indifference. I didn't want to face it, but I had to. This was my reality now. There was no going back. I wasn't the person I had been when I first walked into this house, when I first married him. I was broken, but I wasn't hopeless. I had to rebuild my life. I had to take the first step, even if it terrified me. By the time I finished packing, I felt numb, hollow. I had no idea what the future held, no idea where I would go or what I would do. But one thing was clear: I couldn't stay here, not anymore. As I was putting the last of my things into the suitcase, I heard the front door open. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I knew who it was without even having to look. He was home. I could hear his footsteps as he walked through the hallway, but I didn't move. I didn't want to confront him, not now. I had made my decision. I had to go, and the last thing I wanted was another fight, another round of words that would hurt more than heal. But then I heard him stop at the door. For a long moment, there was silence. I could feel his presence in the room, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. "You're leaving?" His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What could I say to him now? He walked into the room and stood by the door, his eyes scanning the suitcase I was packing, the clothes, the familiar things that had once belonged to both of us. It felt surreal, like I was watching everything from a distance, detached from the pain. "You really think this is the answer?" he asked, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Was it anger? I couldn't tell. "I don't know what else to do," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You made it clear you don't want me here anymore. I don't have a place here." He took a step forward, and I flinched, though I quickly tried to mask it. He noticed. "You're just going to walk away from everything we built?" he asked, his tone now hardening. "You walked away first," I replied, my voice shaking but steady. You made the choice to throw everything away, and I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. I can't stay here pretending like everything's fine when it's not. I can't keep living in a lie. There was a long pause, a silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. He didn't respond immediately, and for a moment I thought he might finally understand, might finally see the pain he had caused. But then he spoke again, his voice cold, almost dismissive. "You're really leaving me over this?" he asked, as if he couldn't comprehend what I was saying. "You're making such a big deal over nothing." "Nothing." It was like a slap in the face. How could he say that? How could he belittle everything I had gone through, everything I had given to this relationship? How could he act like it didn't matter? I felt the rage building inside me, the fire that had been smoldering in my chest finally igniting. I turned to face him, my eyes blazing. "No," I said firmly. "I'm leaving because I deserve better than this. I deserve more than someone who lies to me, who cheats on me, who doesn't even care enough to try to make things right. I deserve someone who values me, who sees me for who I am." For a moment, he stood there, stunned, as if my words had finally gotten through to him. But then the look on his face hardened again, his jaw tightening with frustration. "Fine," he spat. "If you think you can find something better, go. But don't think for one second that you're the only one who's been hurt by all of this." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had taken from me. But I didn't. Instead, I just looked at him one last time, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I didn't want to leave, I didn't want to walk out of that door, but I knew I had to. For my own sanity, for my own peace, I had to let him go. I had to leave him behind, even if it felt like I was leaving a part of myself with him. Without saying another word, I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The drive was long, but I didn't feel anything as I drove through the streets, past the familiar places that had once felt like home. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, there was just an overwhelming sense of loss, of emptiness. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time, that didn't matter. I had left. I had taken the first step. But I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter where I went from here, nothing would ever be the same again. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The city passed by in a blur of flashing lights and empty streets, but inside I was still stuck. Stuck between the life I had left behind and the unknown future ahead. My heart felt heavy, weighed down by everything I had lost. I had walked out the door, made the decision to leave, but now I was faced with the aftermath. The city didn't care. It moved on, indifferent to my pain, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being alone in a world that kept turning without me. Every street I passed reminded me of him, of us. The places we used to go, the corners where we shared laughter and love, they were all now ghosts in my mind. I couldn't escape them. I finally parked by a small, quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, just a place with mismatched chairs and a worn-out sign, but it felt like the kind of refuge I needed. I stepped out of the car and walked into the cafe, the bell above the door ringing softly. The warm smell of coffee and pastries filled the air, comforting in its simplicity. I wasn't sure what I was looking for here, peace, answers, or just a brief moment of distraction. I found a corner table by the window and sat down. The place was quiet, the kind of silence I craved. The server brought me a cup of coffee, and I stared at it for a while, wondering if it was possible to feel anything but the numbness that had settled in my chest. My life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to move forward. The tears had stopped. They hadn't come in waves like they used to. I had cried until I felt empty, like I couldn't cry anymore. Now I was just tired. Tired of thinking, tired of feeling, tired of pretending I had everything under control when the truth was I didn't know who I was anymore. I took a sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through my body, and for a moment I allowed myself to just breathe. To feel something simple, something that didn't require me to think about him, about us, about the wreckage of my marriage. I didn't want to think about it, but it was impossible to ignore. The past few days had been an emotional roller coaster. The moment I walked out of that house, I thought I would feel relief. I thought I would feel free. But instead, I felt like I was floating in a void, drifting without direction. I didn't know who I was without him. I didn't know who I was without that life. I spent the next hour in the cafe, lost in my thoughts. I didn't know what to do next. The world felt like a huge, overwhelming place, and I was suddenly so small in it. I knew I had to move on. I knew I had to heal, but how? How do you pick up the pieces when everything you thought you knew has been shattered? I thought about the man who had come to the door that day, the one who had dropped the bombshell about my husband's betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder what his motives were. He had been so calm, so calculated in his delivery, as if he had been waiting for the moment when I would finally hear the truth. He wasn't there to help me. He was there to expose everything I had been blind to. And for a moment, I had hated him. But then I realized something. He had given me the clarity I needed. He had been the mirror I didn't want to look into, but needed to. But was it enough? Was hearing the truth really going to heal the wounds that had been carved into my soul? It wasn't until I left the cafe and started driving again that something shifted. The weight of the silence in the car was no longer suffocating. I didn't feel as heavy. I wasn't sure why or how, but I felt something in me start to loosen. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe I was finally beginning to accept what had happened. I didn't have the answers. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in days, I felt like I had a glimmer of hope. Maybe that was what I needed most: hope. The hope that I could heal, that I could rebuild myself from the wreckage, and that I didn't have to live in the shadow of my past anymore. I spent the next few days at a friend's place, just staying with them while I tried to get my bearings. I didn't want to go back to the house. I didn't want to face the man who had betrayed me, who had shattered everything I had believed in. I didn't want to face the home we had built together, now a place of memories I wasn't sure I could ever trust again. My friend was kind, offering a place to stay and a listening ear, but even their compassion couldn't fill the emptiness I felt inside. I tried to busy myself with small tasks, going for walks, catching up on old hobbies, reading, but nothing felt right. Everything was tainted by the betrayal, by the reality that my life had been a lie. And then, one evening, something strange happened. As I sat on the couch, flipping through channels, I stumbled across an old show we used to watch together. It was one of those shows that didn't really mean anything but had been a comforting part of our routine. The memories of sitting together, laughing, and sharing those moments flooded back. I almost turned off the TV, unable to bear the bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. But something stopped me. I sat there, watching the show, and for the first time I felt something other than pain. I felt a small spark of something I had long forgotten: joy. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't gone. I hadn't disappeared completely, not yet. I realized that the road to healing wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but it was possible. I could rebuild. I could find my own joy again. It wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. The next day, I decided to take the first real step toward healing. I started looking for a place to stay, something that was mine. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do once I got there, but I knew I couldn't stay in the city forever, weighed down by memories of him. I started making plans for the future, small plans at first, but enough to give me hope. I signed up for a course I had been putting off for years, something I had always wanted to learn but never had the time for. I began reconnected with old friends, people I had neglected in my marriage. I started to rebuild the connections I had lost, the parts of myself I had forgotten. It wasn't a straight line. Some days I still felt the sting of betrayal, still carried the weight of the past on my shoulders. But there were more days now where I felt a sense of peace, where I could imagine a future without him. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The hardest part of healing was learning to forgive myself. For months, I had blamed myself for everything. I had questioned my worth, wondering if I wasn't enough, if I had failed him somehow. But the truth was, I wasn't the one who had betrayed us. I wasn't the one who had given up on our marriage. It took time, but I finally began to accept that. I wasn't perfect. I had my flaws, my mistakes, but I had done my best. And now I had to let go of the guilt. By the time I moved into my new apartment, I had made peace with the past. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me anymore. I was building something new, a life that was mine, where I could heal, where I could be whole again. And one day, maybe not today, but someday I would find love again. Real love. A love that didn't come with lies or betrayal. A love that respected me, valued me, and saw me for who I truly was. But for now, I was enough, and that was a good place to start. The days grew longer as I continued to rebuild my life, piece by broken piece. Each day brought a little more clarity, a little more strength, but it was never easy. Some days I felt like I was crawling through the hours, dragging myself forward with a force that came from deep within me. I didn't know if I was walking toward a better future or just trying to outrun the pain of the past, but I kept moving because that's all I could do. It had been months since I left him, since I had walked out of the house, leaving everything behind. I had found a small apartment, one that felt like mine, one that no longer held his presence. At first, it felt strange, living in a space that was truly mine, that didn't have his shadow lingering in every corner. The walls felt bare without the photographs we had once hung, without the little reminders of who we were before everything fell apart. But I had started to fill it with new memories. Small, quiet ones. I started cooking for myself again, baking in the kitchen the way I used to when I was younger, before the weight of the world made me forget what it felt like to cook just for the joy of it. I started running again, jogging through the park like I did years ago, before life became so complicated. It wasn't easy, but with each step I took, I felt a little more like myself. Some days I couldn't shake the weight of the past, especially when the memories crept up on me when I least expected it. The sound of laughter, a memory of us sitting on the couch together, the touch of his hand brushing against mine. I would remember the way things were before the distance grew between us, before he betrayed me, before I discovered how hollow our life really was. It would hit me like a wave, and I'd have to stop and breathe through the sting of it all. But I didn't let those moments consume me. I couldn't. I had learned painfully that the past was just that, the past. The betrayal, the lies, the broken promises, those were not my present, and they sure as hell weren't going to be my future. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the closet, I came across something unexpected. A photo album. It was an old album, one I hadn't touched in years. It had been buried deep under a stack of forgotten things. As I pulled it out, dust settling around it, I felt a strange mix of dread and curiosity. I knew what was inside. I knew what I would find. I hesitated for a moment, but then I opened it. The first page was filled with pictures from our wedding. The photo of him and me, laughing under the sun, our faces lit up with genuine joy, took me back to a time when everything seemed perfect, when I believed with all my heart that this was it, that we would always be this happy. It hurt to look at it. It hurt because I realized that the person in that photo was gone. That version of me, the one who trusted and believed so fully in our future, was gone too. I flipped through the pages, each picture a reminder of a different time in our life. Vacations, birthdays, family holidays. Each photo was a snapshot of a different person, a different time. And yet, in every single one of those photos, I could see a kind of innocence. A kind of belief that everything would be okay. A belief that everything would stay intact. I closed the album and put it aside, feeling the weight of the past heavy in my chest. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't let the pain overwhelm me. I had already cried for the life we had lost, for the love that had slipped through my fingers. Now I was learning to move forward. Slowly, but surely. The weeks passed, and I found myself in a rhythm. A quiet rhythm that was my own. I had finally begun to understand the depth of my own strength, the quiet resilience I had hidden away all this time. I wasn't the same person I had been when I left him, but I was growing into someone stronger. Someone who knew that, even when the world fell apart, I could still find a way to put myself back together. One evening, as I sat on the couch in my new apartment, a knock on the door broke the silence. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat as I walked to the door, a sense of unease creeping up my spine. When I opened it, I was met with the last person I expected to see. He stood there, awkward and unsure, a shadow of the man I once knew. His eyes were tired, his face drawn with lines I hadn't seen before. His presence felt different now. There was no anger, no bitterness, just emptiness. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. It was the first time I had heard him speak to me like this in months, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was ready to hear what he had to say. I stepped back, making room for him to come in. "Come in," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I wasn't sure why I invited him in, but I did. Maybe it was because I needed closure. Maybe it was because, despite everything, I still cared. I wasn't sure. He sat down on the couch, the distance between us palpable, like an invisible wall that neither of us could break down. I sat across from him, watching him carefully. He didn't look the same. He looked broken. "I'm sorry," he said after a long pause. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted to say it anyway." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched him, unsure of how to process the words. Sorry? For what? Was it for the affair? For the lies? For everything he had taken from me? "I made a huge mistake," he continued, his voice trembling. "And I've spent the last few months trying to understand what I did, why I did it, and I realized I've lost everything that really mattered. I lost you." I sat there in silence, letting his words sink in. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had broken me. But there was another part of me, the part that had been healing, that understood something deeper, something more painful. "You didn't lose me," I said quietly, finally breaking the silence. "You never really had me, not in the way I thought." His face fell, and I could see the regret in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, but I raised my hand to stop him. "You're right," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You made a mistake, a huge one, but it's too late now. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not the person who believed in us, who believed in you. I'm not the person who put my trust in someone who couldn't give it back." I stood up then, not because I was angry, but because I needed to say this. I needed him to hear it. "I've moved on," I said, the finality in my words sinking in. "And I'm not going back, not to you, not to us." For the first time, I saw him truly understand. His eyes softened, a kind of quiet acceptance settling over him. I wasn't the same person who had left him months ago. I had moved past the hurt. I had healed. "I understand," he said softly. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, and that I'll always regret what I did." I didn't answer. Instead, I nodded and walked to the door. When I opened it, he stood up slowly, and for a moment we just stood there, facing each other. No more words, no more apologies, just two people who had once shared a life, now standing apart. "You should go," I said quietly, the words that once held so much pain now just a soft exhale. "Goodbye." As I closed the door behind him, I felt something shift inside me. A sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. The door had closed on him, on our past, and I was ready to move forward. The pain had been real, but it wasn't who I was anymore. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I was going to be the one writing it.